If you are a podcaster, a streamer, or content creator, then stay tuned and learn how Canada might stifle you, your voice, and your content.
Podcast starts now.
This episode addresses the issues around the proposed amendments to Canada's Broadcasting Act. We'll talk about just how big the mess has become and why any government proposing such legislation deserves nothing less than decimation at the polls. But first off, right off the top, 3 things need to be mentioned. Number 1. Stop referring to proposed legislation by its number. Doing so complicates things, as every new parliamentary session begins from 0. There could be many bills with the same number, and quite often there are when people speak of a bill number, especially in historic reference. In the 39th Parliament, for example, Bill C-10 dealt with the Income Tax Act, whereas in the 41st Parliament it dealt with safe communities. Number 2. The bill number in question, Bill C-10 in the current Parliament, is a dud, as is the minister responsible. Now, this podcast always tries to find balance and provide opposing views. However, when a mess is the only thing that sits in front of us, then the only thing to call it is a mess. And number 3, the online and digital world represent an increasingly fundamental part of everyone's future. And if this is how our federal government reacts to that fundamental reality, then they need to be voted out at the earliest possible opportunity. This bill demonstrates arrogance and hubris, lack of understanding and ignorance, a smarmy approach to developing public policy, and a myopic, isolated view that is more characterized by xenophobic provincialists than forward-looking globalists. Bill C-10, or more appropriately, an act to amend the Broadcasting Act and to make consequential amendments to other acts, is a mess. It was introduced in November of last year. Not a lot of people paid much notice, until a few juicy tidbits made it to the front pages. I'm first going to reference an overview by renowned professor and legal scholar Michael Geist, and he writes on his website, "The Canadian Heritage Minister rose in the House of Commons yesterday for the second reading of Bill C-10, his internet regulation bill that reforms the Broadcasting Act. He told the House that the bill would level the playing field, that it would establish a high revenue threshold before applying to internet streamers, would not impact consumer choice or raise consumer costs." Geist goes on to write, he even argued that even if you don't believe in cultural sovereignty, you should still support his bill for the economic benefits it will bring, warning that Canadian producers will miss out on $1 billion by 2023 if the legislation isn't enacted. He painted a picture of internet companies, invariably called web giants, that have millions of Canadian subscribers but do not contribute to the Canadian economy. End quote. The minister is wrong on so many levels. The bill contains thresholds. The bill will reduce consumer choice and increase costs. The bill will reduce investment. He doesn't even seem to understand the fundamental difference between broadcasting and streaming. Really. Oh, it gets better. The minister has had to backtrack on earlier comments. He suggested that the CRTC could impose discoverability regulations on individuals who have a large enough following online, then, oops, decided to say this was not the case. Going back a bit, the feds have maintained that they have no intention of regulating user-generated content, but details of their proposed measures would treat uploaded videos, podcasts, and other content as programs, and would be subject to the same rules applied by broadcasters. So, the minister claimed he was out defending Canadian interests and cultural sovereignty, and that everyone else, not agreeing with him, was unwilling to take on the web giants. The problem is, Minister, your measures were not targeting the so-called web giants. They were going after user content. The biggest problem with this, charter issues and freedom of speech, all under a government led by a prime minister who, ironically, is the son of a prime minister who ushered in Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Experts from the Department of Heritage warned committee members that all programming would be subject to the Broadcast Act, yet the government granted the CRTC expansive regulatory oversight. I'm going to reference Michael Geist again. He writes, "But the problems with Bill C-10 don't end there. The minister has consistently made questionable claims about the content of the bill and how it compares to other jurisdictions. He told the House of Commons that the bill contains economic thresholds. It doesn't. That it excludes news. It doesn't. And that it won't affect Canadian ownership requirements. It will. And that the entire process will be completed by the end of the year. It won't. That it is similar to the approach implemented in Europe. It isn't. Oh, and how about public input and witness testimony? Well, now the committee is looking for clarity. Now, the Justice Department is helping clarify its constitutionality. The opinions of others will be sought. Problem is, the explanations have changed week by week. The minister himself doesn't even seem clear on what the bill does and what it doesn't. And when the government fesses up to, oops, we got it wrong, they decide to remove existing clauses instead of doing what should be done immediately: scrap the bill and start over. At which point there should be full public consultation. Oh, they might also want to consider a cabinet shuffle, putting someone else in the heritage position, maybe someone who knows what he or she is talking about. Visit stephenchristiansen.ca for more episodes. This podcast is available on all major streaming platforms, including Anchor, Spotify, TuneIn, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. I'm Stephen Christiansen. Thanks for listening.
Production of Stephen Christensen. Podcast complete.